Hello there, everybody. Thank you for coming to my panel. I'm Toastie,
I'm Dolores Requiem.
and this is going to be Lend Me an Ear, which is going to be a simple beginner's how-to guide for making cosplay ears. I'm going to go ahead and make a few housekeeping announcements before I really get into stuff. So I would like to say that I have accommodated for time at the very end for questions. So if you have anything that you can think of while we're going through things, go ahead and jot it down, and then I'll do my best to answer it at the very end of the panel. Also, I would like to go ahead and give a disclaimer that this panel is not going to be for something advanced. It's for very simple guides for people who are just starting to get into things and looking for a route to
Make some ears.
Make some ears. So with that said, we will get started. And so this is my quick overview over what everything is going to be about in this panel, just to kind of give everybody a heads up of what's to come, just in case there's something specific that you're looking for, or so on and so forth. So I'm going to start off with going over some patterns and planning for basic ear construction. 3 basic base materials that I use to support the interior of the structure. A little bit on assembly process with wig attachment if necessary, and then like I said at the very end, we'll be going into Q&A. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first part, patterns and planning. The most important part of making anything in general, you always want to have a plan. You always got to have your little pattern piece to get you going where you need to go. It's really good for testing out like shape, size. It gives you a lot of room to play around with something before you get too deep into it to where you would have to unfortunately restart or make any other crazy mistakes.
You might have to make some adjustments because sometimes you make it too small, sometimes you make it too big. So you got to adjust it here and there. So you want to make basically a temporary pattern.
Right. It doesn't have to be out of anything particularly fancy. I usually just use copy paper or construction paper or something of the paper variety. It can be literally anything that you like working with. I know some people like to use tissue paper because it's really malleable. Like I said, I like to use copy paper just because it takes ink really well. I don't have to worry about anything bleeding or whatever if I'm using a pen. And if you use like a marker or a pen on top of the paper, it can be really easy to delineate things that you mark on the pattern itself. So that said, once you have your base pattern, that's going to be decided on what kind of ears are you making. Are you making big ears? Are you making small ears? Are you making little lion ears? Are you making cat ears, which is the most common thing? Are they big? Are they small? So you're going to want to make your base shape. It can be any shape. Generally, if it's a bunny, it'll be kind of like an inverted U, or cats are going to be kind of like a rounded triangle, right? So go ahead and play with shapes on a piece of paper. You can cut them out and then figure out like how it fits with your set, with your head. Proportions to your face are really important. That's usually why I really like to start off with paper more than anything, because I have a really deceptively small face. So for me, I have to plan a whole lot to be able to get something to fit and look the way that I would like it to, in accordance to my face shape and size. So if you are that kind of person, I highly recommend playing around with your paper first. Once you're happy with your size and your shape, go ahead and transfer that onto a different piece of paper. And before you cut it out, you're going to want to add seam allowances for your fabric. And basically what this is it's going to be about anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to typically 5/8 of an inch, which is what the standard seam allowance size is. That allows you to sew into the pattern without it getting smaller than what you had already intended for it to be. So with that shape that you have on that pattern, the easiest way to get your seam allowance is to just get like a little ruler and measure like 1/4 of an inch or 5/8 of an inch, like just drawing little dots around that pattern piece on your paper, and then connecting the dots, and you should have a delineated line of where your seam allowance is, and then an inner line for where, you know, you're the correct size for what your pattern piece would be.
You're basically going to make your pattern piece bigger by just a little bit.
Yeah, it's always good to be bigger than smaller, because as you make adjustments, which you will probably do as you go on, it makes it a lot easier in the long run without you having to start over. While you're doing your pattern, it's really important for me to make a little notch or a mark. It's usually a little line showing where I'm going to pinch the material so it gets that rounded shape that you want, because you're not going to want your paper to just be flat, right? It's got to curve around your head. So I usually do it about 3/4 of the way to the one side. And before we go into the next part, the most important thing that I have to say is mirror your pattern. I'm so bad about this. I always have to make 2 pieces and mark which one's the right side and which one's the left side. And then before I even cut anything out, I'm like, this one's the left side, this one's the right side, and like put them in 2 separate places in front of me, because I'm like, I will get them confused and I will end up with 2 right ears or 2 left ears. And it's happened so many times. So I highly recommend having 2 separate earpieces. It's super convenient and it will save you a lot of stress in the long run.
Copy, paste, flip horizontal.
Yeah, pretty much that. A few tips that I've already mentioned is test it on yourself. Play around with it. Take some scissors. Make sure that you're happy with it, because at the end of the day, that's all that really matters, is that you're happy with it and that this project is something that you are proud of. Making multiples goes hand in hand with mirroring your pattern. Sometimes you lose a pattern piece halfway along the way, or your cat eats it or something. I don't know. It's happened in this house. There's been some wild things that have happened to my pattern pieces. Sometimes your house just eats it. So make multiples to save you stress from later. And mock-ups are your friend. Like I said, with paper, sometimes I'll do it with muslin as we get a little farther into the construction process, which we will start right now with method 1, which is craft foam. So craft foam is a really easily accessible thing for a lot of people, and it's also really cheap. This type of thing is really good for internal bone structures for your ears, so that way they stand up really straight and good and have kind of like a cartilagey, I don't even know if that's a word, a cartilage-like consistency to them, and they stay upright good, but they're not like hard or anything, so you're not knocking around on stuff and bumping stuff over with your ears, depending on how big they are. So craft foam, really easy, really accessible to anybody. You can get it pretty much anywhere. I want to say the United States. You can get it from like Michael's, Hobby Lobby. I believe they might have it at Walmart. I've seen it at Walmart in a few cases. Joann's has it. Pretty much any craft store, it'll be there. And it comes in various sizes. So if you want them to be a little thicker or thinner, you have a lot of room to play with here. So materials, the most important part. You can't make anything without things. So you're going to need your pattern piece, obviously, pattern pieces if you're me. Your craft foam, which you will want to go ahead and trace a pattern of for your thing. And I put stiff craft felt underneath that because this is also a thing that you can get. I've seen it most commonly at like Hobby Lobby, maybe Michael's, but it basically looks like craft felt, but it has kind of a firmer consistency like craft foam. If that's cheaper for you or easier for you to work with, that is an alternative that you can use. I have used it before on my very first set of ears, actually, and it gives pretty much the same result. So depending on what kind of fabric material you're working with, it may be convenient for you. Your desired fabric that you want, usually most of the time, it's going to be kind of, if you're really fluffy, I'll use like a faux fur. And then for the inner part, I like to use fleece, or sometimes if it's accessible and I have scraps around, suede works really well. But you can use pretty much anything you want. It's pretty much up to your own discretion on what kind of look you're wanting.
If you want super fuzzy ears, you want to go with like the faux fur kind of texture.
Yeah.
You can sandwich any kinds of fabric together in different colors. It's just whatever you're going for.
Yeah, if you want them fluffy on the outside and on the inside, you can totally do that. You don't have to have 2 separate different kinds of fabrics on in or the outside. But whichever one it is, just make sure that you cut out enough for inside and outside on your stuff. And the last thing that you're going to need is a hot glue gun, which is super, super important to be able to get the shapes and the standing and that whatnot that you need here. So moving forward, we're going to go into a little bit of the assembly process on how I make ears like the ones that I'm wearing. So the first step is going to obviously be, you're going to cut out your foam and fabric with your pattern. And you can kind of see in the pictures here where I mentioned seam allowance a little bit. So the pattern piece on the right on top of the fur, that's going to be my base pattern piece. And I measured out the desired amount of distance that I needed to accommodate for seams, and then drew that with a pen, cut along that, and then cut it out. One thing that I do want to say for discretion here is if you are using faux fur, like in this picture that's really thick here, using an X-Acto knife to cut it out instead of scissors will save you a lot of stress in the end, because it keeps the fur all in one grain, and it doesn't make it any choppy, so you don't accidentally chop like ends of the fur and have like a chunk missing, and then you're like Patches the cat ear
you
boy
have a
or
straight
whatever.
edge of fur, looks like you did a bad haircut.
Right, you don't want like a mini bowl cut on your ear, right? So X-Acto knives are your friend. I do recommend using them for faux fur, but be very careful, please. They're super sharp. And then for the other side of this picture, as you can see, I have my inner ear fabric. So I cut 2 of each thing, 1 for each side, right?
Don't forget to flip it.
Don't forget to flip it. Don't forget to do that, like I always do, because it's bad. The other really important thing that you need to do on your fabric is take that little notch line that you have on your fabric where you're marking where you want it to fold in a little bit and transfer that to your fabric, because it will help you to line it up later on and make sure that you're getting the desired look that you need. It also really helps figuring out in what side is which if you happen to forget and not label them as left or right, like I do all the time.
That's right. Flip the floof. That's a good one.
Flip the floof.
I like it.
Come on, flip the floof. So the next thing that you're going to want to do is to put your fabric right sides together, as we do for all sewing things. Pin it and then go ahead and sew it. So a really good tip for sewing faux fur fabric is going to be taking a comb and brushing that fur back like along the grain of what it is here. It says against the grain there, but it should say along the grain. So that's a my bad. You're going to want to make sure it's all the way there. It really saves you from having to pull any hair out that may get stuck while you're sewing it or anything in your machine or whatever. You can hand sew these if you would like. I have done it. It just kind of depends on what kind of resources and materials you have at hand for you. I personally like to use a sewing machine for mine because I can be kind of rambunctious when I'm in cosplay and wave my head around and bump into stuff. So I just like to make sure that my seams are really like secure. So part B right there says pull hair out of seams when necessary. And I usually do that with a little sewing pin. You can kind of get in there, hook the hair, and then pull it out of the seam. So that way you don't have anything curled into your seam at all, and it makes it look like less natural.
Yeah, you have to do it gently because you don't want to get the stitches and then pull the stitch out.
Right.
So if you see a little bit of trapped fur in the in the sewing line, you want to pull it out gently with the flick of the wrist, just with that tip of that pin, so you can get that fur fluffing out.
Right. And if for whatever reason, whenever you pull it out with the pin and it gets kind of scraggly, that's okay, because you can trim it later if you really need to, or if you feel like that's what you want to do. So next, you're going to want to get your hot glue and have that heated up, obviously. And then you're going to take your foam base and then go ahead, and I do a little dab on that little mark where I'm going to pinch my my craft foam or my felt, whichever one it is that you're working with. In the picture says craft foam. And then you're going to hold that until it dries. Mm-hmm. And then once that's done, you're going to slide it into the bottom of your little pocket there once it's turned outside. What is it? Right side out.
Right side out. Right sides are like the fluffy side that everyone will see.
Right. And so the reason why we always sew things right sides together if you're new to sewing is so that way nobody sees that seam line and it has like a clean finish. Boop. Next thing is adjust as needed. You can trim any fur as you're going and whatnot. Smooth out your fur. Make sure it sits really smoothly along your craft foam. That way you don't have any bubbling or anything that may look kind of odd for a set of ears. Trim and groom as you please. Trimming any straggly hairs that you have, or making sure things lay correctly, or adjusting as you need to. Whatever you want it to be, whatever you want it to look like. You are allowed to make designer choices with these things, and as long as you're happy, that's all that matters. It doesn't have to be perfect. Your first few are probably going to be kind of interesting. Mine are always interesting. And then of course you're going to want to next after that take your hot glue and fold it along the edge, the bottom edge, your raw edge there on the fabric and the foam. And then I do a little bit of dab just to kind of hold that together. In the picture here, you can see that there's a little bit of exposed foam. If you did it right, it would be covering that foam and it would just be kind of like for lack of a better term, a pizza pocket of foam and fur, but I cut that extra fabric out of the way so that way it was an easier thing to capture so you guys could see what exactly I was talking about here.
The foam supports the ear so it doesn't flop or get saggy or anything like that. So yeah, that's why the foam is exposed there. So you need some sort of support underneath the ears, especially the bigger ears. You need a lot of support for those because you're fighting gravity every time they're out.
Right. And so once you turn it all inside out and you have it all glued together and whatnot, this is eventually what you're going to look like here. You can see that for this particular test that I did, I trimmed the fur along the top so that way it didn't poke out and it wasn't crazy and whatnot. I was going for a more rounded like bear or lion ear type thing here. So I moved it along how I needed, used my comb to comb it in whatever direction. You can use water if things are kind of like going across grain and whatnot. It is fur, so it will react and then dry the way that it's set if necessary. But yeah, you can trim it. And then once you have both of them looking vaguely like this, it's not always going to look vaguely like this depending on what your shape and whatnot is. But once it looks basically like this, you're ready to go ahead and put them on your wig or whatever it is that you're fastening them to your head on, which we will get to in just a few slides. So my next method is, well, oops, yeah, sorry. It would be good if I paid attention to my PowerPoint. So my examples here are going to be things that I've used this method on in the past. So the one on the left is my very first set of ears. So they are going to be a little more scraggly than what I'm wearing right now, or like my wrong ears here on the right. My next method is going to be with Foshape as your internal structure instead of craft foam. I started off with craft foam mostly just because it is the most easily accessible. It is the cheapest thing. I have been that cosplayer that's been building on a budget. So I like to start off with stuff like that that is a really easily accommodating thing for everybody to use and then work my way up from there and so on and so forth. So Foshape is what's next. What is Foshape, Toastie, you might ask? Well, Foshape is a textile that you can purchase. I get mine from like cosplaysupplies.com or something like that. And you can buy it by the meter or the yard, depending on however much you want. And it's a textile that hardens when it's activated by direct heat. So you can take a blow dryer or heat gun to it and it will literally mold to whatever shape or whatever thing that you want it in once it's dried.
It's commonly used in hats, like the brim of hats. It's a fancy textile, to be honest.
It's really fun. I really like it. So for your materials for this particular method, obviously you're going to want your Foshape. And it looks kind of like fleece, which is why I had to label it on this thing here, because it just looks like normal fabric. And then your pattern pieces, your desired fabric that you're using for the exterior of your ears with an X-Acto if necessary. Your heat gun, I'm using a blow dryer just because I like to be able to control the amount of heat that I'm putting on it from like low to high settings. That's also really a thing that I usually preach about a little hard. She knows. Because I've helped her make some things before. But with the blow dryer, what you can do is because it's not as hot as a heat gun, you can really control the consistency that the Foshape hardens into. So Foshape, if used with a heat gun, it will be like hard as a rock. But if you use a blow dryer and you use it on its highest setting a little at a time, it'll get more of a consistency of cartilage where if you move it, it'll still wiggle a little bit, or if you flick it, it'll kind of like waver, but it will still remain hard and firm and have that structure that you need to be able to support the ear itself, much like craft foam, but just fabric form instead.
Foshape is kind of like the Warbler of the fabric world.
Yeah, pretty much. And if you wanted to take this particular part of the tutorial and substitute it with Warbler, you totally could. I've seen it done. It works really well, pretty much the same. Foshape is, price-wise, I want to say it's cheaper than Warbler. It's been a minute since I've bought Warbler personally, so I wouldn't quote me on that. I would say that it's probably about like 20 a yard, but they make different grades of thickness in the Foshape now, so that will determine how expensive your yardage is. But a little goes a long way. Like when I buy a yard of Foshape, I use it for like 5 or 6 years because I use Foshape primarily for ears and just little internal structure things for small details and craft things. So with that said, the last thing we need on our materials list is our handy dandy hot glue. in the assembly part, it's going to be basically cut and dry, cut and paste of the same thing that we did with the craft foam, but we're going to add an extra step, which is molding your faux shape. So you're going to want to cut out your faux shape. I do recommend including a little bit of a seam allowance when you cut your faux shape because it does shrink when it is heated. And if you add a slight seam allowance to it, it will save you the trouble of having to be like, oh no, it's too small now, so I have to completely redo it.
So make your size a little bigger when you cut the faux shape.
Yeah, just a hair bigger than your pattern. It doesn't have to be anything crazy like 1/4 of an inch or 5/8 of an inch like you would for a normal sewing seam allowance. And of course, mark all your fold lines or pinch lines or whatever you want to call them. And once you have that all set, the next thing you're going to do is apply heat to your faux shape. You only have to heat as much as you really need it to. Like I said,
how
stiff you really want your ears to be. Do you want them to be crazy stiff? Do you want them to be a little cartilagey? I use that word again. See, it's a word. I'm creating a word here. A really handy dandy tip for whenever you heat your faux shape, I like to use it as a right angle and use whatever side I'm trying to fold against my countertop as I'm doing things, just because it kind of helps me from having to like finagle things around when you only have one hand, because you have a blow dryer or a heat gun in one hand and you got your thing in the other hand, and that can be kind of hard to do. So utilize your table surface as an extra hand to lend you an ear in the long run. So the next thing is going to be pretty much the same thing as what we did in the very first method, where we're going to pin our fabric, we're going to sew it, turn it right side out, brush your fur away from your seam line before you sew it. If you're using that kind of fabric, pull hairs out if necessary. Hot glue your stuff, insert it into your thing. When I say hot glue your stuff, I mean like make sure it fits and then hot glue it to the bottom edge.
Pizza pocket
your thing, hot glue it to the bottom edge, so that way it's all smoothed out and whatnot and looks smooth like the inside of an ear. You can adjust it as needed with your fur and so on and so forth. If things are kind of fitting a little weird, you need to trim here and there off, that's totally okay. Do whatever you need to do to make it what makes you happy. And then once that's all done, you're ready to wear them. These are some examples of things that I have used for faux shape. I did my Shui and Destiny's Leaks ears out of faux shape as the base there.
And what's neat about faux shape is like as you heat it, you can gently mold it. So you can get that really nice curve that like a lot of cat ears have.
Right.
Where it's like a little thicker and then it tapers out. It's really nice to mold and work with, to be honest.
It's really forgiving. You don't have like a hard crease line if you need to do it like gradually. And yeah, so like she said, like you can get that really nice curve, or you can make it stand up more, or so on and so forth. And that's kind of the point that I wanted to make with these pictures. So on the left with my Shui ears, they're not quite as sturdy as the ears on the right with the Leaks ears, just because of the personal choices we made whenever we were making these ears with faux shape. And we also used faux shape in her Shuzo ears. These ears are huge, as you can see. Like each one, they're like they go out to about like here. They're pretty big. Each ear is about the size of her head.
Yeah.
Faux shape, because it is really forgiving and really moldable and has that potential to be really sturdy. I usually recommend it for bigger ears. So things like fennec fox ears like these ones, or bunny ears would be really good for this. Any kind of thing that you're looking for that is large and in charge.
But be careful, because if you harden it too hard, you can't sew through it.
Right.
Your needle will ram right there and not go past it. So you need to be careful when you're hardening the faux shape. If you do harden it very hard, make sure you have extra fabric, which with these ears we had a little bit of extra fur fabric that I actually used to sew into the wig. These ears are sewn into the wig because they are just so large. And then like with little details as like these ears, you can add like little poof balls into the center of them to make that little tuft of fur that sticks out.
So you can really customize your ears to however you really want them to be. It doesn't just have to be 2 different kinds of fabric. You can put whatever you want in there to get that desired look that you have. So before we go on to our final method, where I'm going to talk a little bit about wig attachment, just because there are some things that I recommend for the first two methods versus the last method, and there are going to be other things that you can do versus my recommendation depending on what your resources are or whatever you feel like doing as a choice instead. So the first one, as she just mentioned with her Shuzo ears, is sewing. You can obviously mark where they sit on your head, and then you can sew them into the wig latticing if you want to. And there's pros and cons to this. So the pros are that it is really, really durable because you're using thread, and thread's really malleable. It is going to conform with however you're wearing your wig. So that way you don't have to worry too much about it like sitting crooked or this or that or the other.
With the large ears, I actually got one of those foam heads that everyone has.
Mm-hmm.
You put that wig on there, you put the ears, and you pin that sucker right into the head itself, and then you can slip stitch the ears into the wig itself.
Mm-hmm. So the other pro for sewing your ears into your wig is that it blends really, really nicely into the hairs on your wig. Because you're sewing it into the latticing, it's really easy for you to be able to move that hair around to really hide any uneven or raw seam lines that you have there underneath the fur. It's also a really great support system because it directly sits on your head. The structure of your head is going to support those threads, so that way it sits out the appropriate way that you need it to. And then cons for this are, unfortunately, because they are literally attached to your wig, depending on how big they are, it can lead to some difficulties with transportation. So if you're going overseas or you're going out of state, like riding a plane, putting your wig in a suitcase or a bag or something, it can make traveling with that item a little bit more tricky.
And storage too.
Right,
like my wig has to sit on that head all the time. I cannot fold it. I cannot put it in a bag. It has to stay on that head and on display all the time.
Oh yeah. There are also usage limitations with this, meaning that like I wouldn't really recommend doing this for something like small, I guess, just because it's kind of hard to get in there and do all that. I usually recommend this for something like big ears, like she mentioned, just because you really need that support and you really want to make sure that it doesn't move around on you at all while it's on your head. So my next method, which is my go-to method that I recommend all the time, is button snaps. And I will show you a picture right after this slide to show you what exactly I mean whenever I use button snaps, to give you an idea of how exactly this works, because I can tell that you're probably going to be like, but button snaps, like what? How is this supposed to work?
So nice.
It's so nice. These ones are actually attached to my head with button snaps right now, actually. So the pros to this are they are also really durable because it is going to sit directly against your head. It's going to have that support from the sculpture of your head and whatever else you have in there to help hold it to the wig. They are also really interchangeable. So if you wanted to say, use this wig for something else and maybe not have ears, but have like a hat or something or whatever, it's really interchangeable. It saves the wig. You don't have to worry about seam ripping anything out or this or that or the other. And it also saves you that trouble of having to like take that whole wig and on a head and then be really careful whenever you're transporting it. You can take the ears off, put them in a bag, put your wig in a bag, or however you transport it, and then just go. The only cons to this, though, is that there's slightly less support just because the button snaps, depending on the size of them, can kind of be a little finicky. They don't always stick together. There is that manufacturer defect that happens. The snap strength is going to be what really, really is going to be what gives you that support. So depending on the size of them, it's going to really determine like how much support you get. Because the big bulky ones are the ones that are like, they're in there, but you can't really get them out. You're going to have to like have the strength of 1,000 men to get that apart. But it just is really up to your own discretion. You can use little itty bitty craft ones, or you can use big ones, so on and so forth. It is a little harder to blend this into your wig just because you're not like moving wig fibers around and like sewing it to hide that seam line there. You kind of have to like move hair and then like hairspray it around wherever you need it. So those are like cons to it. I feel like it's not really a whole lot of give and take here. It makes it pretty easy. I also recommend that this is for smaller ears. So with that said, this is the picture that I was talking about. So with the ears that I'm wearing right now, actually, sorry, they're actually little button snaps sewn onto the bottom of the wig, or well, bottom of the ears and the top of the ears, so that way I can fit it through the latticing of the wig, take a piece of craft felt that I've also sewed the other side of the snaps to, move it around the wig hair, snap it together, and then make sure everything's really in place. This is really good because it's really forgiving. You don't have to worry about accidentally sewing your wig on, or your ear on crooked and it being there like permanently. You can move it around however you need to, adjust it around if you have any other things that are going on your head, and so on and so forth.
Basically, you're going to sandwich the wig.
Mm-hmm. Pizza pocket. It's a real thing. They're really handy. The other thing that I recommend is headbands. Not everybody has wigs. Not everybody likes to use wigs. Like, there's been times where I've used my own hair for stuff, and button snaps and sewing. You can't really sew anything into your head. So headbands are another go-to. They are a fun accessory if you feel like using these kinds of artifacts for things outside of cosplay. It gives you the ability to do that. It has great durability. They're not going to move around really on you at all. You have great ability to determine how straight they are versus not. And you can use them for support inside of your wig if you're using a wig, or outside if you really wanted to leave that kind of accessibility. The only cons to this is that they do get really tangled in your hair or wig. If you are wearing it inside, it can give you a headache right there behind your ears. And there's really hard to really blend this seamlessly into your wig, unfortunately. But it's really good for temporary or quick solutions. So if you're on a time crunch and you're like, man, I don't have time to sew button snaps in my ears to sew this thing into my wig, headband it. Nobody's going to care. You're going to look great. Exactly. So the last little thing I have to talk about here, this one's going to be a little quicker just because I don't really have a whole lot of pictures for this method. I didn't really have the materials available to be able to do this demonstration for you. I would like to be able to have this for you guys later. So after this weekend, I'll probably put some things on here for you guys if you wanted to refer back to it later, and you guys can poke at it and have a visual aid for the things that I'm going to talk about. So this one is going to be for wig fibers for your ears, which is kind of a weird anomaly to think about, I guess. It was a weird thing for me to think about sometimes. If you're really, really picky about like matching your color of your ears to your wig, or you just can't find a fabric that matches like the texture or anything that you want for your ears, you can just use hair. The materials for this are, of course, you're going to need your handy dandy pattern piece. Your faux shape, which is what I recommend to this because you can sew into it a little easier than craft foam or craft felt. It also really helps with the moldability of everything. It's a little more forgiving on the wig fibers. Your craft glue, preferably something that dries clear. So I usually recommend like the fabric fusion as pictured there, or the felt and foam glue that's pictured there as well. Those are the things that I use regularly for this. Fabric of a matching color to your wig fibers. You're going to need scissors, time, and a whole lot of patience. So yes, buckle in for this one. The assembly process on this one is a little long. Of course, you're going to want to take your pattern pieces, mark your fold lines and everything, cut that out accordingly. Heat your faux shape for molding, as we did in method 2. Sew all your fabric to where it's right side out. For this one, you don't have to have 2 different kinds of fabric, just something thin and really easy to work with, like a cotton would be really good for this. And insert your faux shape into the fabric. Make sure it's all smooth and whatnot. You don't want any bubbling for this one at all. Adjust size and fit and everything as necessary here before you get to the very end, because when you get to the very end, you're not going to really have a whole lot of stuff to work with here.
You're basically making a skeleton for laying the wig fibers on this piece.
Exactly. So for step number 5, the next thing you're going to do is hot glue the curve of your faux shape there, the internal structure on your ear. Just do a little bit of hot glue, put your fabric on it, smooth it out with your thumb while it's warm, so that way you don't get any chunking or bubbling or anything on that hot glue, and make sure everything's really flush with that faux shape. It's going to really help with the finished product on this part of the method. The last part, or one of the last parts of this, is applying fabric glue to the external surface of your ear. You can pick whichever side you want to start with, whether it be internal facing or external facing. And then using a paintbrush for this is going to really help you make sure that it's on there really thick and even, because you're going to take your wig fibers next and you are going to, if it'll work with me, you're going to lay them on top of your glue right there. Make sure everything's really even and flush. If you end up not being able to get all of the wig fibers into the glue, that's totally okay, because you're going to go back at the very end and put some more glue on top of that. Make sure that it dries completely. Keep in mind the direction of the way that the hair is going to go and flow with the ear. So like for normal ears, the grain of the hair goes down the back of it, right? Like you're not going to want your wig hairs to go sideways on your ear. You're going to want it to go up and down so it blends seamlessly into your wig. Once that's all dry, you're going to go ahead and add another layer of the glue on top, like I just said, to secure those wig fibers against your ear. Let this dry completely before you flip it over and do the exact same thing to the other side on both ears.
This is very messy.
It's really messy. It takes a lot of time. You're literally playing the waiting game with waiting for glue to dry on this one. But it makes a really neat effect if you are wanting to do it. Make sure you trim any edges at the very end. You may have some wig fibers going in a direction that you don't want.
Or just extra sticking out.
Yeah, just trim them off as you go, and then you're going to be ready to apply them. Application for this is definitely going to be sewing. You don't really have a way to button snap these into your wig, unfortunately, just because they do come out pretty thin. You don't really have that extra material to work with like you do with like a thicker, fluffy fabric. Because you are sewing them in, it is super durable. It blends seamlessly into your wig because you're using the literal wig fibers for your wig. So it's going to be the same color no matter what. Maybe slightly different because of the glue. The only cons is that it can be kind of hard to apply this and make sure that everything's even and sitting right. Make sure you don't have any crooked ears or whatever.
This is not an easy method.
It takes
time to perfect it.
Exactly. It's a really, really large resource.
Years for the advance.
It takes a long time to be able to do this to the point that you're happy with it. So if you want a long-term project and you're just curious, have at it. It's an interesting time. And then this is an example of the ears that I did for this. I used them for Ritska. Ritska has like this dark purple hair that I could not find fur in that I was happy with in anywhere. So I just ordered a really long wig, trimmed off all the excess, and then used that excess hair to repurpose 4 ears on my wig.
It basically looks like you styled the wig as ears.
Mm-hmm. So an alternative for this is if you happen to be cosplaying a character that has things that look kind of like ears but could also be in a hoge, you can just style them into the wig if you have the wig fibers available in the head of the wig to you. So characters like this, I did it for Anubis. Lilia from Twisted Wonderland would be another one that I would recommend this for. You literally just back comb it, smooth it out, hairspray it, all hair gel it, just like you would like a normal wig for this one. It's a lot less time, takes a lot less perfecting, and it's a little bit more forgiving because you can brush it all out in the very end. And this is about what it would look like. It just looks like, they look like ears, but it's just hair on your wig. Super easy, super fun in the very end. And with that, I am actually done. So if anybody has any questions or anything, feel free to throw them at me or Valo's Requiem. We will be here to, it can be like process questions, it can be anything. Let me see if we can see anything. Risa Channel says, is there advice around using bobby pins or hair clips? Yeah, you can use bobby pins and hair clips for a super, super temporary thing. I think I did it as a test one time to mark where things are sitting. You can totally do that if you want. If you do that, I would recommend hiding the little lip on the wig clip behind the ear, so it's a little easier to blend your wig fibers on top of that. But you can totally do that if you want to save yourself all of the sewing and everything.
Yeah, that's probably best for smaller ears too, because clips won't hold heavyweight
Exactly.
ears.
Fluffball Wren says, if one can't buy fall shape because of location, what would be a good replacement? For that, I would probably say like a stiffer craft felt.
Craft felt is very similar feeling to fall shape. It literally feels almost the same until you heat it. Then it really stiffens. But I would suggest craft felt, the stiffer kind, in place of fall shape if you can't get a hold of fall shape.
Right. The only difference with that is it may have a little bit of a thickness difference, but it should give you a really similar result. Even craft foam as well. It's really easy to find, and it is a lot cheaper. Like I think a big sheet of craft foam is like 99 cents or something like that. So if you don't have a whole lot of money or time, like by all means, please go ahead and use that. Whatever you want to, even if you find something else that works really well for you, you can pretty much substitute almost anything. Pashton says, how would you recommend attaching rabbit ears non-permanently? A headband.
Headband, or once again sewing.
Well, non-permanently.
Oh,
so
non-permanent.
It would be a headband.
Yeah,
would be
headband
what I would use.
be probably the best.
If you're using a wig and you don't want the headband to show, I would recommend putting the headband inside the lining of the wig, and then you can glue the ears on through the latticing of the wig if you're using one as necessary. Or you could just tack it real fast. Depending on how big they are, you might be able to get away with the clip method that Fluffball Wren just asked about. It just depends on how big or how heavy they are.
Yeah, it depends on the materials you use. The heavier the ears, the more chances are you're gonna have to do some heavy duty like fastening.
But I would definitely recommend a headband for that one, because you can just take it off, take it on, hide it under hair or whatever you need. I have time for a few more. So Raisa Channel says, could you clarify the where do you do button snaps? How do the button snaps go through the wig if it's a solid cap? Oh, okay. So sometimes wigs have like a scalp in the center of them. I usually recommend going around that. The other thing that you can do is instead of button snapping there at the top, you could glue in like a little bobby pin, stick it into the hair so it hides seamlessly in there. And you could probably do a button snap on the bottom, so that way you can still clip it in and get that extra support. Jormung says, how would you recommend dyeing coloring ears for an ombre effect? That's a really good question. I didn't touch on this in this panel specifically because I wanted to keep it pretty straight and simple for how to construct ears. But for doing an ombre, I usually just use like markers or chalk.
Alcohol markers.
Alcohol markers would be good.
Would be good. You can also dye. This is more of a like kind of textile question. It just depends on what materials you're using, to be honest, as far as like to make the ears. A lot of like faux fur and stuff is polyester. So normal cotton dyes will not take hold very well. It'll be kind of like a dimmer version. But it's basically similar methods to poly dyeing wigs. So like alcohol-based markers, poly dye. Actually, this wig I poly dyed the ends a bit just to get it a bit of a blend. So you could use like poly dyes, alcohol markers.
You could, if you do use dye, paintbrushes are your friend. Don't just like dip it in because you're gonna get like a really, really harsh line on that. I would say start off with a little bit. A little goes a long way, and it's safer to have not done too much because you can always go back and do more. Start off really light. Paintbrush on that dye if you want to use it. And then same thing for the alcohol markers if you decide to use those. The really fun thing about alcohol markers is they come in like a huge variety of colors, whether you're using Copics. I really like to go to, if you have one local, Kinokuniya, that store, they have like a brand of like off-brand alcohol markers. They're like $2 a piece.
They're Cootie color.
It's called Kude Color, yeah. They're like $2 a piece instead of $8 a piece, and they have a really wide range of shades of natural and unnatural colors. So you can go in there, start off really light, and not worry about like, oh, well, this one doesn't work, and then wasting $8 on a Copic marker, right? And you can layer all those colors however you need to get that depth.
There is also other methods to dye faux fur. You can also use a blend of alcohol and ink. I have seen. I actually dyed a plushie with that method. It was also faux fur. You basically saturate the fibers with that, and then as it's drying, you get a pet brush and you comb it out, and that'll help blend the ink into the fibers.
Mm-hmm. That one is really messy though, so if you do that, yes, I would recommend having extras. Go outside. Don't wear things that you want to be stained. And just have fun with it. There's like a million ways that you could do like all kinds of almost anything, really. It's really up to your own choice and what works best for you. Are there any other last minute questions? We still have like a little bit, like a hair of time. I'm going to go ahead and go to
the last
slide for right now, just because I don't see anything else in there for now. I really appreciate everybody coming by so far. Thank you for your patience with me and and all of this. This is my first panel that I've ever done, so I really appreciate you guys coming in to support me and Destiny and enjoying all of this. So if you have any other questions or anything, feel free to like message me on these social medias and poke me about whatever. If you have progress pictures, I'd love to see them, so share them with me, or just, yeah, feel free to poke me about anything that you guys may need. Oh, we have one more question. Yay! Drainzikin says, could you dye fake feathers the same way? That's
so...
I'm not sure, actually.
Alcohol, I think the alcohol markers work with that well.
Yeah.
Feathers are very delicate.
Yeah, I feel like alcohol markers would probably work best for that, for sure. I haven't tried to dye feathers with like actual. Like,
I have. I used
the
alcohol markers, and it turned out okay.
I feel like that would be good also because you could get a really nice gradation effect, like we were talking about with using them on ear fabric as well. You can really control the amount of pressure that you're applying to the thing itself, so that way you can make sure that like, oh, it's dark here or not there, so on and so forth. Any others? We have about, I think, 3 or 4 minutes left.
Yes, try it. Let us know how it works. Sure. We'd love to see pictures.
Yeah, I want to see progress pictures. I love it when people share stuff with me. I get super excited.
Send us messages
about seeing things. I learn a lot from everybody whenever we just interact and share things with each other. There's things that people can come up with and suggest that I haven't even thought of before. So yeah, I would love to see it if you guys share it with us.
Aww.
Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.
Aww.
You guys are so sweet. I'm gonna like blush. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, Chenya ears. That would be fun.
Make all the ears and take pictures and share. Yes, we will be at the cosplay contest later today.
Mm-hmm.
Still in these outfits.
Yeah, we'll still be Bill and Leona later.
Be having some fun.
Some fun.